What's up?
How's everybody doing?
Yeah, yeah. Welcome to Verse Take,
Welcome, welcome.
dude.
This is
You
our
live? You ready?
fourth episode, and today we're here to talk about Charles Simic.
Yeah. Yep.
Charles Simic, I have one of his books over there on the shelf.
Mm-hmm.
This
Yep.
is
Yep.
this is this is a poet that I would describe as austere. Austere,
Mm.
and
Yeah, you just want to get right into him. Yeah.
he is from Eastern Europe.
Yeah. 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 Also described as austere. You mean just in this like kind of straightforward, kind of more like minimalist
Straightforward, kind of
approach?
kind of bare bones, kind of
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
kind of in a way, kind of severe, a little severe.
Yeah. This is it. Serious. You think of him as being serious?
I think
Yeah.
of him definitely as being sort of serious, but having a sense of humor.
Mm-hmm.
But it is,
Yeah,
I
that's what I
feel
was
like
gonna say. Yeah,
I think it's like an Eastern European sort of sense of humor.
yeah, it's
Um,
kind of yeah. He does have kind of a dark sense of humor.
right.
Um, it's kind of like a cosmic joke. I feel like going on.
Mm.
Maybe sort of all the time. I don't know.
I think he made a joke that I read that he joked that when he was a kid, his travel agents were Hitler and Stalin.
Yes. Yep. 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 Yeah. Right.
So
Yep.
a sense of humor, but kind of a dark sense of humor.
Yeah. 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 No. I have to admit I was not real familiar with Charles Simic before we started on him this week. So
Mm.
for me, this has been a real joy. I'm almost kind of embarrassed to say how little I knew of Charles Simic before getting into this, because he's prolific. Uh,
Mm.
like tons of books, like 16 books, I think. Um,
Okay.
he had a pretty long career there. It was like over 30 years, professor at like University of New Hampshire. Um,
Okay.
yeah, he's publishing like I think when did he start publishing? Like in the maybe in the 60s, I want to say, after he spent some time in the war. So
Yeah, I do think that. I
yeah,
do think that's what it was.
it's I was just surprised how much he's written and how little I had come across him. I mean, I knew the name, I knew you had that book. I kind of had a vague idea of who he was, but it's just been a real pleasure kind of diving in and uh, and learning more.
Yeah, he's a great poet. His work is I do find it to be approachable yet a bit
Mm-hmm.
severe, and he is
Yeah.
writing a lot in the. He was actually adolescent during World War II, and
Mm-hmm. Yep.
so some of our earlier episodes we talked about poetry in the post World War II days. So this guy is
Mm-hmm.
also
Mm-hmm.
sort of can be seen as a post World War II poet, but slightly
Right.
different. Someone who kind of
Mm-hmm.
he's almost like a refugee from the war,
Yes. Yeah.
going from a World War II refugee to even being drafted
Mm-hmm.
to fight in Vietnam.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So this is a guy who has a brutal idea of life. He you
That's,
know um, from growing up and going through World War II to being drafted in what I'm pretty sure was Vietnam in I think
that's what I was say.
61.
Was it Vietnam
61
61 or was it like Korea? Or,
61 I think is Vietnam. I mean, I think Korea was more like
okay.
52, 53.
Okay.
And I'm
Okay.
not sure. I
Yeah,
don't
I'm
know
not
if they
too
had.
sure.
I
Yeah.
don't know if they had a draft for Korea. I think the draft was for
I think.
Vietnam because he was
Mm,
drafted. He was drafted.
mm,
I
mm,
do remember that.
mm,
But
yeah. Um. Yeah. No. It it was. Gosh, I'm sorry. Where were you going with it? I'm gonna cut in and not have anything to say here.
no. I was just saying that he's a guy who's kind of came up in the post World War II, but he's almost
Mm-hmm. Yes.
his
Yes. Yeah.
poetry almost reflects like someone who may not have always been given a choice. Charles Simic, he may not have always
Oh,
been
okay,
given
okay,
a
I hear you.
choice because he had to go from place to place throughout World War II, and then he was actually drafted in a, you know, to go to
Right,
Vietnam,
right, right, right.
Vietnam
Yeah,
in
yeah.
1961. So the fact that he's had to deal with these wars, I feel like contributes to his austere. I'll even go so far as to say brutal style. His
Mm.
sense of humor
I wonder if,
is
mm,
even a bit brutal.
yeah, yeah, dark for sure. I wonder almost a little bit with him, and I know. So with him coming to the U.S., like he came when he was like 16. I think I read or saw that he had um, maybe started speaking English when he was like 14, or maybe not till when he was
Mm.
16 when he got here. But and I don't know if this. So similarly, although he was Charles Simic's a little bit younger than him, but I wonder if there's like a connection with like Bukowski. Bukowski's style. He was born in Germany. Obviously,
Mm.
um, Bukowski was born in Yugoslavia at the time, but kind of like they had like kind of, I mean, it's a Slavic country. They had like I don't know, some German influence, but or maybe the Eastern European, just something about like the minimalist style, because it's almost kind of like a little bit of Bukowski, a little bit of Hemingway, that just that minimalist, raw, also this, surreal. Um, you're never really quite sure what reality is with him sometimes, and um, like he changes perspectives, like has a poem from like the perspective of a dog, and it's like things, the absurd, you
Mm.
you never quite know if it's real or not in a way.
Mm.
Sometimes it's almost kind of it can be like a little dreamlike, but yeah, I wonder if there's just some kind of connection there between him and Bukowski obviously has his own style, but there's, I don't know, there's something there. What do you think?
I think there may be something there because we're talking about two people kind of from the Eastern Europe or former like Soviet bloc countries. So, their
Hmm.
parents probably influenced them. There's a certain, there's a certain minimalism to both Bukowski and Simic. And with
Hmm. Hmm.
Simic, it's like, I've described his style as being austere. I even used the word brutalist, and you brought up the term minimalist. So that makes me think of
Hmm.
sort of brutalist architecture, the European architecture of the
Yeah.
post World War
Hmm.
II
Definitely.
era.
Yeah.
And that was definitely popular in those Eastern European, and definitely those Soviet bloc countries. And the brutalist
Yeah.
architecture, it's kind of it's austere, it's
Yeah.
almost it's severe, it's
Right.
stark, and it
Hmm.
almost is
Hmm.
it it almost kind of describes the 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 perceived order of the
Mm.
post
Mm.
World War II sort of
Hmm.
bipolar
Hmm.
world that emerged between
Yeah.
America and the Soviet Union in World War II after World War
Yeah.
II.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that you say perceived order, because with that's kind of almost how I would think with of Simic. I, I Many of his poems are almost like reminiscent of form. Like,
Mm.
they don't quite hold the form, but they're like reminiscent of form. They're not quite rhythmic. It's not a set rhythm, but there's like a musicality. There's a subtle
Mm.
music, uh, and they point to form, but they're not
Right.
quite in order per se.
and
And
and and we'll
yeah.
go. I'll get more. We'll talk a little bit about that, like when we actually get into the poems. But you're right. The poem I have today, if you just upon looking at it, you'll think it's just an ordinary, four ordinary quatrains, but they're
Mhm.
not
Mhm.
exactly
Mhm.
metered. They're not exactly
Mhm.
measured
Mhm.
out. The syllables aren't exactly measured, but they do sort of
Yeah.
they do sort of gesture at form.
Yeah. Right.
They
Yeah.
gesture at
That.
like a form, and
Mhm.
this is a stark contrast with some of the poets that we talked about, like Robert Frost, who,
Yeah.
even though he was harkening back to the romantic days, he very much was like a modernist in the fact that he was
Mhm.
using the forms and,
Mhm.
sort of keep it, allowing his poetry to kind of bloom off of there. But then we have somebody a
Mhm.
bit younger who's, from Eastern Europe, exposed to the little bit more of the horrors of the 20th century. He gets to
Mhm.
America and begins to break some of these same forms and
Mhm.
begins to
Mhm.
sort of,
Yeah. Yeah.
gesture
Yeah. You
toward
know,
those forms.
I think there is a little bit of a connection there between Robert Frost and Simic, even if it's just that, like, I mean, you got to think that Simic read Frost. He had to have.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I was thinking of him in a similar way of how Frost is. He's like kind of like that sort of in between of like a modernist and a romantic. And in some ways, I think of Simic, because of his, because it's kind of reminiscent of form. He's not quite, he's kind of got one foot in, 1 foot in and 1 foot out, sort of. He's kind of, you know, pointing to the future. He's got like a, kind of a, sort of foot in the past,
Mm-hmm.
um, and one other kind of point about him that sort of general point is that I was watching this uh, lecture the other day from Dr. Michael Segru. If you know, look him up. But he's giving one on Meister Eckhart, and with Meister Eckhart, he's this old Christian mystic from late 13th century, early 14th century, and he's not quite a poet, but he uses sort of contradiction to sort of talk about, kind of talk about God because, God is, where the subject and object meet, right? He says that, like, God is the word that speaks itself, you know? And so he uses sort of these illogical and, like, sort of metaphors to kind of be able to speak about something that can't be spoken about, right? And so using sort of contradictions or images or metaphors as a way of pointing to something that you can't necessarily put a finger on. And that's how I've been reading Charles Simic. Many of his poems have these images, have these metaphors, and he's never quite exactly what it is, but he just kind of points you in a general direction of this place and just kind of allows you to find it yourself. So um, that's kind of my big takeaway and what I've really this week why I've enjoyed so much um, reading Simic and getting to know him better.
Mm. That's I agree. I even though I did have that Charles Simic book, it was great to go back through and kind of
Mm-hmm.
read a couple of his poems here and there. I should have it. I wish I had it right here in front of me. I'll tell you guys the name of the book. I think it was the one from maybe like '76, I think. But
Mm-hmm.
um, he's a great poet. And as always, here on Verse
Yeah.
Dig, I picked a poem
Yep.
to sort of read and analyze. Just to pick the poem to read and
Yep.
analyze, and we're gonna be kind of going back and forth and giving our sort of 2 cents on it. Like whatever we thought of the poem, like some allusions we saw, or just things we
Mm-hmm.
came across, and you know, sort of get in.
Just what
Without further ado, I
what
think we
grabbed
might as
us?
well
Yeah.
get into it.
Yeah. I think you go. I think I went first last week, right?
Okay, cool. I'll go first this week. And the poem I chose this week is called Karen or Sharon's Cosmology. Let me share my screen. Give me 1 second. Yep, the poem is called Sharon's Cosmology. And Sharon was the ferryman who used to who used to, probably still does, I'm not sure, but he would ferry souls across, the river Styx, into Hades once the soul passed away. And I and the poem is it's called Sharon's Cosmology. And before I read it, I just wanted to just let everybody know, like, a cosmology is sort of the idea of, like, the whole universe, sort of, I guess, all of space and all of time, and just like all of the sort of different phenomena of the universe. There's all sorts of the Judeo-Christian sort of, in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth, and then all the way through to Revelations. That would kind of be the whole cosmology. In Hindu cosmology, there's the billions of years of cycles of time, sort of all driven by desires. So a cosmology is sort of like the totality of the cosmos. It's like the idea of the entire cosmos. So without further ado, I'd like to go ahead and read Sharon's Cosmology by Charles Simic. Sharon's Cosmology. With only his dim lantern to tell him where he is, and every time a mountain of fresh corpses to load up, take them to the other side where there are plenty more. I'd say by now he must be confused as to which side is which. I'd say it doesn't matter. No one complains. He's got their pockets to go through. In one, a crust of bread, in another, a sausage. Once in a long while, a mirror or a book which he throws overboard into the dark river, swift and cold and deep. That's Sharon's Cosmology by Charles Simic. And it appears that there's 4 ordinary quatrains here, but there's a little bit more at work behind the scenes. And the reason I wanted to kind of give people a brief idea of a cosmology is because a cosmology, like I said, is the totality of the universe, but it's not the same thing as like a teleology. Like it's not about does this make sense, or why is whoever the person is, he's not named within the poem, but from the title we can infer that it is Sharon, the ferryman of the river Styx. It's not about why Sharon is doing what he's doing, why he's transporting corpses across the river Styx. It's just the fact that he is. So we approach Sharon in this poem as a phenomenon. We approach the character of this poem phenomenologically, the same way death is sort of presented to us as a phenomenon. With only his dim lantern to tell him where he is, and every time a mountain of fresh corpses to load up. This sort of gives us the dimension of the ferryman. The ferryman goes back and forth across the river. He on either side there's mountains of corpses because death is just constantly streaming through. He ferries the corpses from one side to the next, and as we go on through the poem, uh, it says he must be confused as to which side is which. The ferryman may be confused as to, oh, was this the side where they're coming from the living, they're going into Hades, which is which? It almost, and as the poem goes on to say, I'd say it doesn't matter. No one complains. Their pockets to go through. It's interesting that he just finds a crust of bread or like a sausage in the people's pockets. A crust of bread is almost like the fringe of the bread, the end of the bread, and a sausage is almost like uh, a food made from sort of leftover meats. So we're here in this in between place where the ferryman is going back and forth across this river like a ping pong ball being knocked back and forth, and in this fringe place within the pockets he finds these sort of fringe things like a crust of bread or a sausage. And you know, the last stanza I feel is where we kind of get a taste of Simic's sort of brutal humor. You know, once in a long while, a mirror or a book that people may have something interesting they have been buried with, but he throws those overboard into the dark river. You know, you would almost think that the 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 ferryman may find these things to be interesting. You may almost think that the ferryman maybe would think like, oh, let me hold on to this mirror or this book. But it doesn't matter if you were in life, if you were vain and you love to look at yourself in the mirror. It doesn't matter if you in life you love to read books. Everything is sort of thrown overboard. You know, Sharon is sort of indifferent to everything, the same way death is sort of indifferent to everything, and everything must go overboard. The same way that in life you can't take anything with you. Swift and cold and deep not
Mm-hmm.
only describes the river, but it describes death as well. Death can death can be swift, and even if your last days are drawn out, the moment of your death is swift, it's cold, and it's deep. So sort of like a there's a little joke in there, like you'd almost think that maybe Sharon it would be holding on to the mirror or the book. Think of the Little Mermaid. Remember how the Little Mermaid had all those little trinkets that she was like, that she liked, the little
I
things, but
don't.
they were it was just trash though. It
Mm,
was really
mm,
it was really just trash from the above world that she had that would keep us like little trinkets. But no, not Sharon.
I mean, hey, could
He's
be
cold and
could.
indifferent.
Yeah.
He's just quick to sort of throw these things overboard, swift and cold and deep,
Yeah.
and that describes death itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's a kind of a beautiful image of death, swift and cold and deep.
Mm,
I mean, it is. This is one that this is one that I remember when I read it. Kind of, you read it the first time. A lot of his poems are like this. It makes you just kind of stop and you know,
right.
just kind of, you kind of sit there with it for a moment. Swift and cold and deep. You think how, yeah, quick death can come and you know, cold. But you're just
Mm,
left with nothing and deep. I mean, it's like once they're gone, they're gone, they're gone.
right.
There's no there's it's fathomless. But no, that's a beautiful poem. That is one that um yeah, that makes you kind of stop and you know contemplate. He gestures towards things, kind of gestures towards something, kind of almost kind of a metaphysics, like on our,
Mm,
you can kind of almost take it into life.
mm,
It's not quite it's not quite like a little nursery rhyme where you're like, hey, use this for,
right.
to be a good person, or, sharing is caring, but it almost gestures.
It's interesting because we're here with Sharon, a figure from the Greco-Roman world. It sort of
Mm-hmm.
reminds me
Mm-hmm.
of Sisyphus. The
Mm,
old
mm,
cliche of how we must imagine Sisyphus happy. You know, we must imagine Sisyphus is in, like, I think it's content maybe or something like that. And in this poem, it's almost like maybe we must imagine Sharon as content. Sharon is he's sort of content in his almost his indifference. He's almost he almost it almost doesn't matter sort of which side of the river he's on, because he knows once he's on the other side, all he has to do is turn around and go to the other side.
Right. Yeah.
there's a never ending stream of dead piling up,
Right.
and
Yeah.
even if and everybody and I also kind of look at this poem like, everybody eats. There's nothing really special about that. Maybe
Mhm.
some
Mhm.
people have a mirror, a nice little pocket mirror, or some people have a book. It's like, look, I died. I got my favorite book with me. I have my favorite book with me.
Yeah.
To the hardened ferryman, the
Mhm.
the
Mhm.
Sharon himself, none of it matters. Push, push, push. All of it just
Right.
thrown overboard, and you know, and but then again, and also Sharon, he has a great audience. No one complains anyway. You
Right.
know.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's interesting too, like with his like dim lantern. There's almost like, is there like sort of a wisdom, and almost him kind of, he can't see very far anyway. He can't see very
Mm,
far. It's not, um, he doesn't know which side he is which anymore. It almost and it doesn't matter. Um,
right.
there's almost kind of like a, he says, I'd say by now he must be confused. Um, but I wonder if there's almost like this workman like wisdom there that
Mm,
that the that he has. Like he's just doing his job.
right. And I love the some of the juxtapositions in the poem. Yeah, and I mean, not only do we have the juxtaposition of the two riverbanks that he's sort of ferrying back and forth between, we have the mirror contrasted with the book, and but then so we have those things, those sort of contrast, but we also have the things that are sort of viewed together, how death itself is sort of viewed, how Sharon's indifference is the same as death's indifference, and how you can't take anything with you in the boat, you
Hmm.
cannot take anything with you to the afterlife, period. So
Yeah,
and
yeah,
to be honest, this is a bit of a bit of irony for the a bit of extra poetic irony, if you will. um Sharon, obviously in the underworld, Hades, he works for Hades or Pluto. Sharon is a moon that sort of that orbits the planetoid. I think they call it Pluto. And
mm,
but Pluto is actually a place of, there's sort of a tradition in it's sort of more of a Roman tradition than the Greek tradition, but the underworld is a place of great wealth. Pluto,
mm,
the leader of the underworld,
mm,
there's a large amount of wealth in the underworld, like a lot of riches in the underworld, which is why a society ruled by the wealthy is called a plutocracy.
right, yep,
So,
yeah,
like, so Pluto, uh, Hades himself down in the underworld, he's very rich and very wealthy, but one of his, his servant Sharon, obviously the heavenly body that revolves around Pluto, has no is barren, can like sort of
mm,
carry nothing with it.
yeah, yeah. That's interesting.
The only thing they can carry, the only thing he can carry are the bodies that he ferries,
Mm,
across the
mm,
river.
hmm. Yeah, yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, one thing too I'm looking at, that kind of struck me was, you kind of have these three images here of, when he goes through their pockets, and one a crust of bread and another a sausage, or once in a while a mirror, or a book. It's kind of like these are like almost like three images of like the like bodily pleasures with the bread and sausage.
Mm, okay.
Um, the mirror is almost like vanity, you know,
Mm, right.
and then that book is like knowledge,
Right.
and like those are like, you know those two are things that get tossed overboard into this, dark river, swift, cold, and deep. Some ways too, I don't know. You could sometimes this might not be right, but sometimes the soul can also be, uh, symbolized by a river. In this case, I
Mm,
don't know that it is, but
right. The
yeah,
soul, also the passage of time. The flow of
correct.
life.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah.
And so yeah.
Yeah.
This is
Yeah. It's
Sharon's cosmology.
great.
This is
Great poem.
Sharon's universe. This is
Mhm. Right.
Sharon's. This is
Yep.
his. This is a view into his life, and
Yeah. Yeah.
it's kind of interesting to just take a character from the Greco-Roman world and just sort of write a poem of their life. It's sort of, I don't know, it's just
Extrapolate on it.
right. It's interesting.
Yeah.
Definitely
No,
very
absolutely.
interesting. But
Yeah. No, that
that's
was a
Sharon's
great,
Cosmology,
great,
Charles
great
Simic.
choice. Yeah.
Check it out. That was from his 1999 book. He's got it right here. Sharon's
Yeah.
Cosmology from Charles Simic, selected early poems, copyright 1999.
Mm.
So
Is that the one? I think that maybe I'm wrong. Does it say was it his selected poems that won the Pulitzer? Might not be. Um. Yeah, that's an awesome. Yeah, that was a good one.
all
Um.
right. So now what was the poem that you chose? Just
Late Arrival.
okay.
Yeah.
I got it right here. Okay. Yeah.
All right.
Late arrival.
There we go. All right. It all fits on one screen.
Great.
Um.
Yeah, I tried, but the other one I
Right.
couldn't get it to.
Perfect. All right. So, Late Arrival. Charles Simic. The world was already here, serene in its otherness. It only took you to arrive on the late afternoon train to where no one awaited you. A town no one ever remembered because of its drabness, where you lost your way searching for a place to stay in a maze of identical streets. It was then that you heard, as if for the very first time, the sound of your own footsteps under a church clock which had stopped just as you did, between two empty streets aglow in the afternoon sunlight, two modest stretches of infinity for you to wonder at before resuming your walk. So, Late Arrival. It's another one. Just kind of like the last one. This is sort of like this is an image. This is like gonna be the third time I've said this. He kind of uses this image, this metaphor to sort of gesture at something larger. Um, we have it's again it's kind of reminiscent of form almost. You have four stanzas, each with 5 lines. Um, but there's no particular rhythm here. Um, he does in your last poem. There were no end stops, um, no periods. This one we do have periods. It is broken into sentences. There's a few end stopped lines. Um, what's also kind of interesting, and I don't know how much it says in the poem, but the first stanza is broken up into 2 sentences. So the first sentence is 2 lines. The third or the second uh, sentence is 3 lines. So it, that first stanza is broken into those two, and then the next sentence is 5 lines. It's that whole next stanza, and then the fourth sentence is 10 lines. Those last 2 stanzas. So and there's some sense of form here where you do have some end, you do have some repetition, you do have some end rhyme. Um, so like in the second stanza here, you have a town no one ever remembered. You kind of have that no one ever remembered, or sorry, in a town, no, a town no one ever remembered because of its drabness, which calls back to that second uh, line in the first stanza, the otherness. right? And these two stanzas are almost, the second stanza is almost kind of broken into two, like the first stanza, but it's one sentence. It's this kind of different sound. So you have a town no one ever remembered because of its drabness, where you lost your way, searching for a place to stay in a maze, that kind of long A sound, of identical streets. And it just has this like identical streets uptick. Um, and then you kind of have uh, another, in the next stanza you hear that under a church clock which had stopped just as you did. This has those kind of little rhymes there, but um, there's a musicality to his line. There's like kind of a subtle music to the poetry, um, but it's not, it's not nursery rhymes. There's no, it's not A B A B.
Right, right.
Um, but it's, he still uses like sound devices, right? It still pays attention to sound. Um, this poem for me, what I kind of was taking from it though is, you know, I kind of almost am seeing this, this late arrival. Like, what is this? Is this, is this a metaphor for, this metaphor for life, right? Uh, as all things are,
Mm-hmm.
right? So the world was already here, serene in its otherness. I'm thinking like this is almost like birth. We're
Right.
born into a world, that's already here when we get here.
Mm-hmm.
And it's already formed in only it only took you to arrive on the late afternoon train to where no one awaited you. I'm thinking, uh, we're arriving late because, when you're born into life, everything important that's happened has already happened in the past. you know
Mm.
you came late,
Yeah.
you came after all the important stuff happened.
Right.
That's how it usually goes, right? And you're on the late afternoon train, right? Like the sun's already headed down. you know we're already past noon. And no one awaited you. I'm thinking like we're essentially alone in life, right?
Mm-hmm.
So here you are, showing up late, alone, to this world that's already been formed, to a town no one ever remembered because of its drabness, where you lost your way, searching for a place to stay in a maze of identical streets. I don't know is this like. Is this the humdrum, monotonous minutia of our lives? Is this suburbia? Is this just you know,
Right.
the humdrum? Um, this drabness, losing your way in sort of mediocrity, trying to find a place, it kind of all looks the same, you know, in life sometimes, it's all kind of shit sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it was then, when you're searching, through this humdrum life, you're searching, then you heard, as if for the very first time, the sound of your own footsteps. I'm thinking that is the sound, hearing the sound of your own footsteps, is that hearing the sound of your own, is that being faced with your own mortality for the first time? You know? It's like when you're lost and you're searching is now all of a sudden you're confronted with your own mortality. Like we said, we're already late in the afternoon arriving. And
Right. Right.
you know, so also, under a church clock, almost of course, right? Under the church clock, like you think of a clock like Father Time, think of
Right.
like Saturn. We're talking about cosmology, you know, Saturn being like the, father of, time, the god of time. Um,
Mm.
and, so almost like under this church clock, you're hearing the footsteps of your own mortality, which had stopped just as you did. It's like, we're entering into a place outside of the measurements or the confines of the clock of
Mm.
time, you know, of the way in which we formerly ordered our life. according to this church clock, you know.
Okay.
But, it stopped, you know, just as we heard our own mortality. We heard our own footsteps, right?
Right.
The church clock stops between two empty streets, kind of between two decisions. And that's
Mm.
why I kind of think of this also like Robert Frost, like the road less taken,
Right.
and Robert Frost is often, going out for walks, and
Mm-hmm.
so, and here we are kind of going through a walk through a town,
Right.
but Charles Simic, unlike where Robert Frost being, maybe also being from here, he has more of a pastoral tradition. Charles Simic lived in the countryside of New Hampshire and went into New York City all the time and wrote about New York City, but did it from the suburbs, right?
Mm.
So he kind of almost is like almost the opposite in a way, you know. But anyways, back between two empty streets, like kind of between two decisions, a glow in the afternoon sunlight, right? We're hitting are we hitting the golden hour? Are we getting close to the golden hour? Um, Two modest stretches of infinity for you to wonder at before resuming your walk. Um, these two empty streets, these two decisions. It's almost like choosing. I'm almost modest. I'm almost thinking like mediocrity. It's like, do I take the job? Do I not? These are two
Mm.
modest stretches of infinity, you know, and for you to wonder at. And the thing is like you're between the two empty streets. You're also, and that is a stretch of infinity that you're in between. Also, the stretch of infinity that you're in between is the time that the clock stopped. So you're kind of like you're in an in between space. You're in an in between time. You know, you've stepped out of space and time, and you're sort of you're in this place of making a decision. So
Mm.
um, this kind of what I take to this is what is this? Is this a late arrival? Is this a late bloomer? Is this someone at the at the end of life, or later in life, making a decision, you know with the knowledge of their own mortality, knowing that they'll it's two modest stretches of infinity, you know
Right.
um and this poem it kind of points to that, but it doesn't pin it down. Um and the, I wonder, like, for the poet, for the poet, like, it's almost like he believes in wisdom, in truth, but maybe he knows it's out there, but he can't quite tell you what it is. He can only kind of gesture at it, allude to it, sort of point to it, but ultimately you have to kind of go and find it for yourself. And yeah,
Yeah.
that's that. That's late arrival.
You know when I, when you said the two modest stretches of infinity, the reason why I
Hmm.
think they're almost modest because maybe one person would look at them and say, okay, it's just two empty streets, but
Mm-hmm.
a
Right.
street has almost unlimited possibilities. So that's kind of why I
Yeah.
see it as like a modest stretch of infinity.
Yeah.
And
Well, sorry. Also, to that emptiness, you think it reminds me also of Tao, 26, in a couple ways. One, this, because you have these stretches that for you to wonder at, you know, you're kind of, he's the sage with his heavy luggage cart, looking at the sights, but also with the Tao, um, emptiness, uh, as being close to infinity, as being this sort of emptiness as being like ripe for to become full. kind of going to your point about these empty streets, it could be anything.
right? Empty as in open or like not filled up.
Mm-hmm.
There's
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
room for something to happen on
Yes.
these streets.
Right. Correct.
You know, for you to
Yeah. No.
wonder at, wonder. But I like how for you to wonder at, not wander.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Mm-hmm.
not You're not wandering on the streets. You're
Mm-hmm.
wondering. You know, and a lot of times, some of the most important decisions in your life may take place in a sort of drab place, a sort of nondescript place where no one remembers.
Yeah. Well, in the poem really at the end, like the point of the poem, it's like it's the time that he stops. Like the whole time he's traveling all the way up to that point, and then you know, for you to wonder at before resuming your walk. It's a space in between.
Right,
It's like an acknowledged space in between that there
right.
will be something after and that there was something before. You know.
Well, a similarity between our two poems. My poem was a liminal space, as took place on a cosmic ferry, and
Mm-hmm.
this is sort of
Mm-hmm.
a it sort of takes place, I guess, at a train station that has sort of
Mm-hmm.
cosmic implications.
Yeah. Right.
Because
Right.
we find the character of your poem is also sort of on the fringe, in a
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
he's arriving late in this nondescript town. No one's meeting
Right.
him,
Yeah.
but he's still this fringe encounter where clocks stop and the sun sort of stands still overhead.
Mm-hmm.
They
Mm-hmm.
still have consequential decisions to make, sort of within this sort of cosmic scene. The scene
Absolutely.
becomes cosmic
Yeah.
from
Yeah.
with the glow of the sun and the two
Mm-hmm.
paralleled by two streets.
Right. Right. I'm. It almost is. It is. He's often described as surreal, but it is surreal. It almost it makes me think of. It's almost like a little. I'm almost like a little creeped out. Like I'm almost thinking like it
Mm,
might be sunny, but I'm like thinking like there's no one on the streets. Like I'm imagining like completely empty town,
right,
like he's walking through like no sign of life, like this is a ghost town, like
right.
it's the
But
and
it
a
is a
lot of
late.
his
It might
poetry
be,
is like that. Yeah.
even though it is sunny, it is a late arrival. So this might be like a summer arrival where
Mhm.
the
Mhm.
sun's still out and it's like 8 o'clock, but
Right.
everybody's already gone home, kind
Yeah. No, I mean I'm even kind of imagining it could be like, yeah, summer Sunday. It's like,
of.
maybe right around supper time.
Right.
What would be the late train on the Sunday in this time?
Yeah, probably 5 or something, 4 something, maybe.
Yeah. You got the
This
late
this
afternoon sun. Yeah.
the same way the town. I'm imagining the same way the town is kind of marginal. This is kind of a late afternoon. Obviously, it's not evening or dusk, but it's like it's getting into that. Into the evening,
Mhm.
into
Mhm.
it's not dark yet, but it's about to get dark. That's why like everything sort of stands still at that golden hour. They
Mhm.
call it the
Mhm.
golden hour, where the
Right.
sun's not quite yet down, but it's
Mhm.
on its way down.
Right. Yeah, I mean it almost kind of in life when you have that point. I mean, hell, I mean you could say, I mean we're come, you're if you I'm thinking like this is like your mid to late 30s. You're in the late afternoon.
Yeah.
Probably, it's
All
like
right.
that
Really?
mid-afternoon time.
Well, I guess, in some ways, I guess. I guess.
Yeah, I mean, what you think you're likely probably gonna live into your maybe 70s? You think you make
Right.
80s?
But I see what you mean. I kind of
Hmm.
thought of nighttime as being death. You know. Rage
Oh yeah,
Against
I
the
guess I'm
Dot.
thinking of like evening and maybe like
Yeah.
midnight or something like that.
Yeah. Midnight. If midnight is death, you're right. But if
Yeah.
nightfall is death, because of
Mm-hmm.
rage. I'm kind of thinking rage against the dying of the
Yeah.
light kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
yeah, it depending on where we place death, yeah,
Right.
your
Yeah.
late 30s is kind of late afternoon.
Yeah, but it's just that time of day too, where you're kind of you could
It's a
yeah you
transitional
can make
time,
you can yeah it is and it you know it's you're not really doing anything in that mid afternoon time,
right?
but it could set you up for the night. I don't it's
Right.
gonna affect your night how your night goes, but yeah it is you know
I mean, a lot of the poetry we've been reading and writing about lately, the poets are capturing these liminal, in
mm,
between
mm,
moments. Like
mm, mm,
what I mean. There's something about these sort of, like the mid, like the late afternoon.
mm-hmm.
It's not the day. It's not the full day. It's not nighttime.
Yeah,
These
yeah,
transition times. But the thing about this poem, not only is the time transitional, the
mm-hmm,
location is transitional. The
mm-hmm,
time
mm-hmm,
transitional, the location
mm-hmm,
transitional, maybe
mm-hmm.
even the point in the poet in the the person within the poem's life is also transitional.
Yeah, I mean, in your poem was very much transitional as well, in the sense that I mean,
Right?
it was like literally the the transition,
Yeah.
between
Trans
underworlds,
Sticks Fairy. I guess they'd call
Yeah,
that the
yeah,
Trans Sticks Fairy, you
yeah.
know.
That's So I mean, um,
So Charles Simic, with this poet, we have a
yeah.
poet that is, like you said, he's gesturing towards a lot of concepts. He's not coming right
Mhm,
out and
mhm.
saying it, but
Yeah.
the language is approachable.
Mhm. Yep.
The poetry is there. You
Mhm.
peel back a little bit of the
Right.
surface, you get a
Right.
lot.
Right. Yeah, and
The
that's the thing too. It's approachable. It's like it's accessible. But there is there are layers of understanding, and it's not like it's like completely. He doesn't like completely abandon form. I mean, like
mm,
the poem that I had, kind of that, that way, stay, maze, he uses still, poetic, sound devices, he doesn't completely abandon those, it's not,
mm,
and there is kind of a little bit of a, it has a feel, it might not be a strict rhythm, but it does have a feel to it,
right,
um, and, it's definitely, it's in a conversational, tone, but, um, yeah, I mean, he's a, he's a great poet. There's a reason why he's the poet laureate in 2007. There's he's won Pulitzer. All the major awards this guy's gotten them.
the
And that's
juice
because
is worth the squeeze. The juice is
yeah,
definitely
yeah,
worth the squeeze.
yeah. It's enjoyable. You can like learn and there's a little bit of a spiritual touch to it. There's um even touching on like, mythological concepts,
Mm-hmm.
like in your poem. So it's, he kind of, he's well rounded,
A brutal minimalist.
Mm.
Brutal minimalist, but with a sense of humor. Is it definitely got a
Yeah.
sense of humor?
Uh-huh.
So
Uh-huh.
like I'm in, kind of reminds me of everything from the European brutalist architecture to
Yep.
even other sort of European authors like your Bukowski. There's a minimalism, there's a
Mm-hmm.
brutalism, there's an austerity, and
Yeah.
this is a guy who knows that in life you don't always get to choose. Sometimes choices are made for you in life, and you have
Mm.
to sort of
Mm.
deal with the fallout. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know,
I feel I feel like there's, I want to add one other thing is I feel like there is like there's definitely an American quality to there is something like Eastern Bloc like to it, but I feel like there's something maybe because I don't know if it's because so much of it is influenced or about New York City, um,
mm,
but there is an American quality to his like. It's been like, would you say? Could you point anything and be like that's like kind of like an American touch
I guess I would
or
say
influence or
maybe in the way he sort of gestures at form, because the Terrence Hayes American sonnets we did last week,
mm-hmm,
they
right,
were not in iambic pentameter. They were not
right,
always, they weren't in iambic pentameter. They did not always have
mm-hmm,
a rhyme scheme, but they were
mm-hmm,
all
mm-hmm.
described as American sonnets. They did still
Right.
have the correct amount of lines, and they didn't
Yeah, yeah, they
necessarily
kind of,
have the
yeah,
octet sestet form either. So maybe
yeah.
it's American the
That
way
could be.
he's
That could
sort
be.
of
That could.
gesturing
Yeah.
at form.
Right. Right. Yeah. Because I read where he said that like essentially I think this might have been in his autobiography like he wrote all his poetry in English because he wanted his friends and girls that he liked to read it. You know.
Okay. Well, that I can definitely see that being described as American.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Um. But I don't know. I was just asking because I was like, there's something. I feel like there is something there. Like there's definitely an influence. His childhood influences him, obviously. Like, but I was like, I feel like there's. I can't quite put my finger on it, and that's why I ask.
Mm,
Just like you wouldn't say Bukowski's like a German writer,
no,
you know.
but
But it
Bukowski's
seems,
poetry can
yeah.
be a bit more. Bukowski can have some longer poems, some sort of more involved poems than
Hmm.
Simic, I would say. Um, and I mean, maybe this is a somewhat of a disagreement. We have to agree to disagree, but I can see a lot of the austere, brutal sort of the minimalism popularized in post World War II Europe in Simic's poetry, and
Hmm. Yeah, no, I mean, I don't disagree with that. I'm just kind of furthering
mm,
the kind of the conversation. Um, yeah, I don't disagree with that. Um, but yeah. Well, dude, hey, I think Charles Simic, dude, I'm really glad that we did this. Because getting to read him more and I even watched I watched a reading that he did when he was a poet laureate and watched a couple like videos, interviews with him, and so just getting to kind of learn about him more and getting to read his work. He's definitely going to be someone I'm going to return to many times, again.
for sure, for sure. I'd like to get a couple more of his books. I mean, man, by the end of
Oh
this,
yeah, for sure.
I'm just gonna have books and books and books of poetry by the end of this, man. When
Right.
it's all said and
Yeah.
done.
Yeah.
Because in
Yeah.
some ways, I almost don't want to talk about poets. I want to almost, I don't know, just because Poetry Foundation. Don't get me wrong, it's a great resource, but you almost kind of want
Of
to
course.
read.
Yeah.
You almost
Yeah.
kind of want to read. I don't know,
Mhm. Mhm.
several from the same book. I kind of like
Yeah.
to read
Right.
several
Right.
from the same book,
Yeah.
just to
Uh-huh.
kind of.
Yeah. I enjoy that too. Sim
Because
Simic was the
sometimes you read a
first that I had
poem,
to do that with. Yeah.
then you're like, man, this one's from 1952, this one's from
Mhm.
78. You know what I mean? I'm kind of all
Mm.
over the
Mhm.
place,
Mhm.
you know.
Right. Yeah. It is something. It's like you know instead of just listening to like Bob Dylan's hits, like you finally listen to
Than an album. Yeah,
yeah, Nashville Skyline or something like that.
you guys, you listen to
Um,
Blood on the Tracks, kids.
right. Yeah. Yeah.
Trust me.
Um, but then you hear the songs like in within the context of the album and you're like, oh fuck, like that's
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, I love that. I love that with poetry too. You end up doing the same thing, oftentimes
Right.
when you actually get a book and you're reading, it's Yeah, there's nothing like it. So yeah, dude, I hear you.
So
I
yeah,
hear you.
man. I mean, hey,
Next next week we're doing K Ryan.
okay, yeah. Thanks for
So
reminding me.
that yeah, I looked it up today, so I could
Mm,
get a jump on it. Uh,
yeah. The
yeah.
thing about, I mean, I don't know, like listening to some of the early episodes, Terrence Hayes, he
Hmm.
had just a lot going on in his poetry. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So
I think yeah, he had a lot going on. There's like it's we might find when they're more contemporary, we might have a lot more to draw from, just from personal experience.
mm, maybe that, but also, Charles Simic, we have described his poetry as minimalist.
Yeah, exactly that too. Yeah,
So I
there's
mean,
few images. There's like one image. It's like
right. So on one hand, the poetry is minimalist. Then on the other hand, I guess the podcast may be a bit shorter. You know.
right. Yeah. Even though I mean the thing is, I'm not gonna like compare and be like, ooh, I like more or less or whatever. But like, I really like Charles Simic. Like, I had like moments reading Charles Simic throughout the week where I just had to
Mhm.
be like,
What
I mean that.
what made us go with him this week? Because I mean, don't get me wrong, I like Charles Simic, but it was
Right.
never like he's not like my super favorite. So I don't know if I don't
I
remember
think what
me.
we went.
Did I
I think
suggest
because
him?
you did we were talking, we were shooting around off camera. We were shooting around
Okay.
some ideas for poets that we were gonna do. You had mentioned Charles Simic, and like I didn't like jump at it, but then when we were just like made out a list, I just wanted to do Charles Simic since you had suggested him.
Okay.
Like,
Okay.
because I think I wanted to do. Because who did we do right after that? We might have
You said
done.
K. Ryan.
Yeah, we might have done. I think it might have been with Terrence Hayes. Maybe because I was like, I kind of pushed us to do Terrence Hayes or something like that. I don't know.
Mm.
I felt like I pushed us to do Terrence Hayes, so I was like, let's just do Charles Simic next.
But once I got into some of the Terrence Hayes poetry, and just there was so much in there, just from the allusions to
Hmm.
hip hop,
Hmm.
and even in that
Yeah.
even with those American sonnets, like one of the first ones,
Hmm.
he brought up Sylvia Plath, So
Hmm.
he's talking
Hmm.
about everything
Hmm.
from Sylvia Plath to Old Dirty Bastard. So
Right.
I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
there,
Yeah. I know. I know.
and then
Yeah.
of course
Yeah. It's cool. It's fun.
we had to make sure everybody knew that Terrence Hayes is legit, not corporate woke BS.
Yeah. Right. Exactly. Yeah. We really
Even though there
wanted.
is a
Yeah.
social justice element, so that kind
Sure.
of took
Sure.
some time to
Sure.
hash out. Which isn't,
Right. Right.
power to the
These are the
people,
times we
man.
live in. Right.
Exactly,
These are the times we live in.
exactly.
But no, dude. The short of the podcast is no reflection on the at least the appreciation for the poet.
Exactly. Yeah,
Um,
Charles Simic.
yeah.
He's a minimalist poet, brutalist. I'll call
Hmm.
Charles Simic the he's the austere minimalist, or the brutal
Yeah.
minimalist.
Yeah. See, I want to call him Meister Simic. Because he has all
Mm.
these these metaphors, these allusions that just sort of vaguely point the way towards this deeper, metaphysics, this sort of this other realm, this other, this higher understanding. But he never,
There is a sort of
yeah.
there is a sort of cosmic, there are plenty of cosmic sort of allusions to Charles Simic. He's not
Hmm.
afraid to talk
Hmm.
about the Greek gods, but it's also
Yeah.
in the book I have. He has poems like about a flea, like a flea biting a
Uh-huh.
couple after
Right.
they,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. No, that's another thing. Is like he's got that poem. He's got like a poem about a fork. He's got a poem about melons. He's got like he writes about sort of mundane, everyday things and sort of can take them to sort of a higher place. You know, which is
He's like a image, some like a image, I guess, imagistic.
yeah. But I guess that's why maybe you'd say surreal. And that because his
The surreal minimalist.
yeah, because it's almost, yeah, it's like a,
In a way, it is
yeah, because,
surreal. Surreal is kind
yeah,
of because I mean, from the point of view of a fork, from the point of view of a flea, you
uh-huh.
know. So it
Right, yeah,
is.
I don't know if it was from the point of view of the fork, but he did write one from like the point of view of a dog, and there's times where like in
Oh, that
his,
was the stray.
um,
That was the stray, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
that's a
Okay.
fun, yeah, I like that one, yeah.
Right.
Um, he, you don't quite know what's like real or not
Right.
sometimes.
Because he also has one I read about about a person stopping and looking at some cows. But at the beginning of the poem, he says something like the cows prayed to be reincarnated, and so the three of them grazed together in the field or something like that. And then
Yeah,
and then
yeah,
at the end of the poem, it's just some guy just is just watching them eat.
yeah, yeah,
But the beginning of the poem, they prayed to be reincarnated together, and so that's why they're
yeah,
grazing in the field. But then like I almost, even though it wasn't I that described him as austere and brutalist.
mm,
Those are things
mm,
I've read, but he's brutal, but he has a sense of humor. There's a
right,
slight sense of
yeah,
humor with Charles Simic,
yeah,
you
yeah.
know.
It's not sadistic. It's
Right.
he's almost kind of laughing with you because the universe is sort of laughing at us.
Right. Right. It's a little absurd. A little absurd.
Yeah, yeah,
But I don't
for
want to
sure.
go as full as say full absurdist though, because
No, 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 no.
he's a little too rough for full blown absurdism.
Right, yeah, yeah, yeah. He's not. Yeah, there's a bit of whimsy. There's a
Right.
little whimsy,
Right.
but
The austere surrealist.
uh-huh, yeah.
Charles
But
Simic,
that's yeah. It's like it's surreal. It's like super real. It's like that's you know.
he's the austere surrealist, Charles Simic.
Yeah,
You know, and hey,
yeah. Well,
well, we got
dude,
one
that
under
was
the belt.
that's yeah, Mr.
Charles
Charles
Simic, check
Simic.
him
Oh,
out, guys. He's
R.I.P. Yeah,
good.
Pat.
I liked
Passed
him
away just a
before.
year ago too.
Oh,
Sadly.
did he? Rest in peace.
Yeah,
R.I.P.
yeah. Yeah, it was 2023. Yeah,
Okay, well, rest in peace, Charles Simic.
yeah,
He's a great writer. We loved his stuff. And
yeah.
great
Thank you,
poet,
Mr.
man.
Simic, and
Thank you, Mr.
yeah,
Simic. Everybody say
yeah.
thank you.
Right, yeah.
Thank you, Mr.
All right.
Simic.
All right, now kids, if you enjoyed what you saw here today, hit that subscribe button, get in the comments,
I want you guys to elbow
all that
drop that
stuff,
like
right?
button.
Right, yeah. Yeah,
I
yeah.
want you guys
I
to
want you to,
headbutt. I
yeah,
want you to headbutt that
right, yeah.
bell. Headbutt that notification bell.
Look, I'm taking the armband off. I'm throwing it in the stands. I'm giving him the people's elbow
I want you
on
guys
that
to
like button
double
on the subscribe.
double
Right,
punch that comment button. If you got something to say,
right, yeah.
hit it like that. Go for it.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And I've been James Bigby.
Yep.
This
Justin
is
Kane.
my man Justin. We're at Verse Take. These are our takes on verses.
Mm-hmm.
So Verse Take.
That's right. Yeah.
You know?
Absolutely. Not. Yeah. All right.
Rock on.
I don't know.
Double
Yep.
thumbs up. We'll see you guys later. Signing off. Say goodnight, Jess.
Good night. All right. There we go. We'll work on that.
Right.